There is one American state where the typical two-bedroom apartment rents for right around $1,000 a month, and that same apartment in California would cost you more than 2.5 times as much. We're not talking about a single small town that nobody's heard of. We're talking about an entire state, where the everyday cost of living sits far below what most of the country pays. So today we're counting down the 10 cheapest states to live in America in 2026, ranked entirely on published government data, and the state that comes out on top might be worth a serious look if you've been thinking about where to go next. Before we start, it's worth explaining how the list was actually put together, because the method is what makes it useful. The ranking pulls from 3 public sources. The first is the Cost of Living Index from the Council for Community and Economic Research, where the national average is set at 100. So a score of 86 simply means a state runs about 14% cheaper than the country as a whole. The second is the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Fair Market Rents for Fiscal Year 2025, which keeps every rent figure measured the same way from state to state. And the third is unemployment data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for May 2026, when the national rate was 4.3%. Income figures come from the Census Bureau's 2024 American Community Survey. With that out of the way, let's count down. Starting us off at number 10 is Indiana, with a cost of living index of around 92. That's below the national average, but it's the highest score on our list, which makes Indiana the gentlest step down in price. A 2-bedroom apartment here averages about $1,153 a month under HUD's fair market rent, compared with $1,671 across the country and roughly $2,580 in California. So you're paying close to a third less than the typical American renter. Where Indiana really holds up is work, because the unemployment rate sat at just 3.3% in May 2026, a full point below the national figure, supported by one of the deepest manufacturing economies in the country. The trade-off is that Indiana is a flat, landlocked state with long gray winters and not much in the way of dramatic scenery, so the appeal here is a practical, affordable life rather than a postcard view out the window. At number 9, we have Kentucky, sitting at a cost of living index of around 92, with a 2-bedroom averaging about $1,096 a month. What Kentucky offers is steady, all-around value, because it pairs inexpensive housing with low property taxes and some of the cheaper electricity costs in the country. The catch shows up in 2 numbers worth paying attention to. Median household income was $64,526 in 2024, which lands below the national median, and unemployment was running at 4.5% in May 2026, a little above the national rate. So while your money stretches comfortably here, the wages and the job market are a bit weaker than what you'll find in the states above it on this list. Number 8 is Iowa, and this is the one I'd ask you to pay extra attention to, because it outperforms its reputation by a wide margin. The cost of living index is around 91, and a 2-bedroom runs about $1,040 a month, roughly 38% below the national figure. What sets Iowa apart is its housing, because it has the most affordable homes in the country. Once you measure them against local income, it takes only about 3.7 years of the median household income to buy a typical Iowa home, which ran around $283,000 in 2025, and that's the best price-to-income ratio of any state in the nation. On top of that, unemployment was 3.2% in May 2026, among the lowest you'll find anywhere. The downside is real enough. The winters are harsh, and a lot of the rural counties are barely growing. But if your goal is to actually own a home rather than rent one, Iowa does the math better than anywhere else on this list. Coming in at number 7 is Missouri, with a cost of living index of around 90 and a 2-bedroom averaging about $1,124 a month. That's the highest rent on our list, though it still lands about a third under the national figure. Missouri's real advantage is that it gives you 2 genuine cities, Kansas City and St. Louis, which means big league sports, a real cultural scene, and plenty of jobs, all at a cost of living that a city that size usually can't offer. Unemployment was 3.8% in May 2026, a touch better than the national average. The thing to keep in mind is that Missouri's violent crime rate runs above the national average, So where you land inside the state, right down to the specific neighborhood, ends up mattering more here than in most places. At number 6, we've got Kansas. With a cost of living index of around 87 and a two-bedroom running about $1,085 a month, somewhere around 36% below the national figure. The word that fits Kansas best is balance, because it puts genuinely cheap housing alongside a stable job market. With unemployment at 3.9% in May 2026, and because the eastern edge of the state sits right up against Kansas City, you can get most of the access of a major metro without paying metro prices for it. The downside is geographic. A large part of Kansas is rural and fairly remote, and the state sits squarely in Tornado Alley, which pushes up insurance costs and is simply something you have to make your peace with. Halfway to the top, at number 5, is Alabama. With a cost of living index of around 89 and a two-bedroom averaging about $1,072 a month. The standout here is the job market, because Alabama's unemployment rate was just 3.0% in May 2026. One of the lowest in the entire country, driven by a fast-growing aerospace and bioscience cluster up in Huntsville. That city is home to NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, the defense contractors based out of Cummings Research Park, and the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology, which on its own has generated more than $4.2 billion in economic impact for the state. The thing to weigh against all that is Alabama's poverty rate, which runs above the national average, and the fact that, as in much of the Deep South, healthcare access in the rural counties can be thin. Number 4 is West Virginia, with a cost of living index of 88.3. And it has the cheapest rent on this entire list, because a two-bedroom averages just $985 a month. The lowest statewide figure in the country, while its median home prices are the lowest in the nation as well. If your income travels with you, your dollar goes further here than almost anywhere else in America. But there's a serious structural issue that you have to understand before considering it, because West Virginia has the lowest labor force participation rate in the United States, slipping to 54% in May 2026 against a national average of around 62%, which means a large share of working-age adults aren't in the job market at all. Median household income was $60,798 in 2024, the second lowest in the country. All of which is to say, this is a state that works well for remote workers and retirees, but far less so for someone arriving to look for a local job. At number 3, we have Arkansas. With a cost of living index of around 88 and a two-bedroom running about $987 a month, which puts it essentially level with West Virginia for the cheapest rent on the list. The appeal is straightforward affordability, because low home prices and low property taxes let a paycheck stretch a long way, and the Ozark scenery is a good deal prettier than the state usually gets credit for. The drawbacks are worth saying plainly. Median household income was $62,106 in 2024. The fourth lowest of any state, unemployment was 4.2% in May 2026, and Arkansas carries some of the highest combined sales tax rates in the country, which steadily chips away at those savings every time you're at the register. That brings us to number 2, Mississippi, which is actually the cheapest state on the cost of living index at 83.3, around 17% below the national average, and it has the lowest median home prices in the entire country, with a two-bedroom averaging about $1,081 a month. So the obvious question is why it isn't sitting at number 1, and there are two reasons. The first is that median household income was $59,127 in 2024, the lowest of any state in America. The second is that while unemployment of 3.8% in May 2026 is perfectly healthy, the wider economy here is thinner than the state we've got in the top spot. Mississippi is the affordability leader on paper, but being cheap to buy into and being easy to earn a living in are two very different things. Hold on to that thought, though, because Mississippi has one more card to play, and we'll come back to it in a minute. And the number 1 cheapest state to live in America in 2026 is Oklahoma, with a cost of living index of 86.0, about 14% below the national average, and a two-bedroom running about $1,091 a month. The reason Oklahoma takes the top spot ahead of cheaper Mississippi comes down to one thing. It combines those low costs with a real diversified economy instead of just being inexpensive. Unemployment was 3.6% in May 2026, comfortably below the national rate, and both Oklahoma City and Tulsa anchored genuinely growing job markets in aerospace and bioscience. Greater Oklahoma City's aerospace sector alone supports more than 80,000 jobs and $8.8 billion in output, led by Tinker Air Force Base and the FAA's Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center. While the bioscience cluster in the city has grown more than 10% over the last decade, that mix of a low cost of living and an actual career path is what makes Oklahoma the best overall value in the country this year. Now, for anyone watching this with retirement on their mind, here's where Mississippi earns back some of the ground it lost. Mississippi is one of only about a dozen states that fully exempts every kind of retirement income from state income tax. And according to the Mississippi Department of Revenue, that covers your Social Security benefits, your pension, whether it's public or private, and your withdrawals from a 401k or an IRA, all of it free from state tax. When you put that alongside the lowest home prices anywhere in America, a retiree living on a fixed income could make a strong case that Mississippi, not Oklahoma, is the real number one. And it's worth circling back to Iowa, our pick at number 8, for anyone whose real aim is to buy rather than rent. Because that 3.7 years of income figure to buy a home is the best ratio in the entire United States. In a country where the typical buyer is stretched thinner every year, Iowa is one of the few places left where a middle-class income still buys a middle-class house without stretching you to the breaking point. So if owning your home is the actual goal, Iowa may well be the smartest move on this whole list. So there is the full countdown, with Oklahoma taking the top spot overall, Mississippi winning on retirement and home prices, and Iowa coming out ahead on pure buying power. The one thing to keep in mind with every state on this list is that the statewide average hides enormous differences from one city to the next, where the right town can make a cheap state feel even cheaper, and the wrong one can wipe out the savings completely. In the next video, we're taking that idea further, looking at 10 of the cheapest cities in America to rent a 2-bedroom right now. Cities that have what you actually need to live there, not just a low price tag. Subscribe so you catch it when it goes up, and I'll see you in the next one.